Thanks for coming. I think it's interesting in this land of the Southern book that today we are talking about what's called the Western novel. I think most writers are slightly skeptical about being categorized in any way, but the books today that we're going to talk about do take place mostly in the West, not entirely. And they have, as your program says, the elements of the classic genre. I guess that's right. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure we care. I'm your moderator. I am not known as a moderate person, and so I'm encouraging my two very talented and very spicy women here to be as immoderate as they please. Okay, I will not, except our introducer of the introducers said no bad words. Okay. I'll leave it to you. Okay. I'd like to ask Elizabeth and Paulette, this is Elizabeth Crook, Paulette Jiles to her right, to read from the beginning of their books, just about a page to give you an idea of how their books begin, and then we can take off from there. So,
okay.
You want to start?
Sure. Yeah, but I wanted to say thanks to, the festival. I mean, I've been involved with the Texas Book Festival for 20 years since the beginning, and it's a lot of work. So, thanks to the festival for having me, Beverly for doing this, and Paulette is my new friend. We've been crossing paths for a lot of years, and but met on our connecting flight yesterday, so that was great. Okay, so I also wanted to say thanks to John Evans at Lemira Bookstore, because he has been so good to this book and to me, and he's really the reason I'm here, so I'm grateful to him. So yeah, the first page. Okay. Comfort, Texas, November 1868. Dear Small Tot, I hope to lay down these events in a manner helpful to you concerning some days you will probably not fully remember when you get older. I think you will want a clear idea of what occurred. It is plain to me I should do this, as otherwise you might worry over too many hard questions you can't ever answer. I will arrange for this account to come to you when you are 19 years of age or greater, not sooner, there being sundry adult matters involved in it. Currently, I am 19 years of age myself and think it a suitable age for you to read this. That should give you time to have done a few things and known people and figured some of them out. Also to have read books. Amongst the books given or borrowed to me is the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin about his quest at the age of 20 to improve on his morals and scruples. I figure he must have had worthy ideas by the age of 19 to have even embarked on such a notion, and from what I have seen of you, Tot, I believe you might grow to be equally wise, and 19 would do to read this. As well, don't read it if you don't want to, on account of you didn't ask for it. Another point made by Benjamin Franklin was how the best method to live your life over again, if a person might want to, is to put down tracks to recall it even whilst it takes place. He advised noting events on paper. I can't do that on your behalf, as you are but 4 years old currently, and no doubt seen different things from what I did, and seen some of the same things in different lights as well. But I will do what I can to that end. For myself, I am bound to remember these days I write about until the reaper should come fetch me. So.
Thank you. Okay, Paulette?
Yes.
Do you need a book?
I did.
Okay, I got one.
So you said the first 2 pages up to, you marked it?
Down to, who are you?
Down to,
Who are you?
okay.
Or up to?
Ding, ding, ding. He found himself lying under white sheets with very little idea how he had gotten there. It was the morning he woke up. A piercing, repetitive noise broke like thin glass over his consciousness. It was the sound of a dinner bell. He heard rolling carts, the jingle of dishes rattling against one another, and his head felt tight, and he didn't know why. He seemed to have been there for some time. People nearby were talking. Everything was painted white. The walls, the center posts, a wooden roof overhead. A hot breeze moved down the aisle between the rows of beds. He looked out and he saw that his coverings were neat and unbloodied, and his hands were laid on top of the sheets as if carefully placed there one by one. His bed was too short for him. They always were. And all the beds were men, and most of them were bandaged, some had crutches. The low murmur of conversation went on and on. He saw that he did not have his clothes on, but instead a sort of nightgown. He could smell vinegar and boracic acid. A young man came walking down the aisle and stopped by the foot of his cot. The boy's hair was spiky as a porcupine's, and he paused with a deep lean forward to look closely into the tall man's face. Canvas curtains at the far end lifted and fell with the breeze. He slowly pieced together the fragments of his present situation. He was in a field hospital somewhere. He was still in possession of both arms, both legs, a pair of feet, and a pair of hands, and he could evidently see out of both eyes. His head felt like it was encased in a bucket. He quietly regarded the young man staring at the foot of his bed, and he wondered if he was some relation to him. After a moment, he said, "Who are you?"
Thank you. Okay. I want to start off by talking a little bit about the Western novel. When I think of Western novelists, if I was forced to think of them that way, I would think of Larry McMurtry. I would think of Zane Grey, Louis L'Amour, and, Cormac McCarthy. There are a lot of writers who have written about the West, Wallace Stegner. If you'll notice, all of them are men. And when I Googled yesterday the Western novel, there were 2 women out of 50 listed who write books that somebody categorizes as Western. I just wonder if you have anything to say. Now, if you listen to these openings, Elizabeth's book is narrated by a young man, and Paulette, the main character, the protagonist, it's in third person, but is also a man. So, these are not women who necessarily just write about women by any means. So anything you have to say about that, if you like it, if you don't, if you think of that when you start to write a book. I mean, Paulette has lived in many different places, and Elizabeth, you've written about other places. Mm-hmm. So whatever you have to say.
Okay. Well, not all of my books have been what would be categorized as Westerns. But these last 2, which deal with this same character, Benjamin Shreve, are in Texas and during the Civil War and Reconstruction era. And I think for me, the whole genre thing, a lot of authors feel like they don't want their book categorized. And I think really what readers are looking for is a great story that has characters they can care about, or be interested in, and that's what I've always tried to do. I think the Western influence for me came from growing up. I mean, I've lived in Texas almost all of my life, and my grandparents had a ranch, so I was around a lot of animals. But my brother, who was 3 years older, liked to watch Westerns on TV. And it was kind of the law of the West in our house, and that there was no rule about having to share, you know? So if I was watching something that I preferred, like Gilligan's Island or Bewitched or something, he would just come in and change the channel, and we would be watching Gunsmoke or The Rifleman or one of those programs. And so I just became very familiar with the Westerns, you know, from television and from, you know, from having no real choice in what we were watching. And so I found myself when I wrote, this was a place I knew. I could go back into this era, this place, and feel comfortable, you know, with it. And so I think that's how several of my books have sort of ended up as Westerns.
And do you watch any Western TV now?
Anything new that comes out, I do. I don't go back and watch old episodes of Bonanza. I did find out that, I mean, as I grew up, you know, then and could choose my own channels. My brother went off to college, and I was a teenager, and you know, and I found myself, you know, the Big Valley was it for me. I would get home every day, make myself a big, you know, what we called a purple cow ice cream with grapefruit juice on it, and sit down and watch the Big Valley. And you know, so I think it became something I sort of claimed because of the familiarity and the sort of comfort of it. But any new Western series that comes out or anything, I'm on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Paulette?
Yes, I grew up with a Western tradition, but it was a folk tradition. We didn't get a television until I was 12 years old, and by that time I had just lost all desire to watch things on a moving screen. But there was lots of stories. It's the Westerns are very close to a folk tale, you know, in reality. And of course, the basis of it goes back far more than 100 years, when the West was supposedly wide open, ignoring the fact that Native American tribes had been there for 12,000 years. But anyway, it seemed a wide open land. It's like science fiction when people land on an exoplanet and there's nobody on it, and they step into complete mystery. And the dangers that lie in wait in this mystery. And it's sort of so it's a quest tale. It's almost always a quest.
Right.
You're in quest of something, even knowledge if you're landing on an exoplanet, and or you're in quest of revenge or a lost child, or to rescue some person, as in the Madstone, and also in the Which Way Tree. So it's closer to the folk tale. I don't know how many people read folk tales, but they're interesting sort of in an analytical, scientific way. If you look at them, you can of course find the different channels and rivers that run through quest tales. They vary because of this, that, and the other, and so that has interested me. I love that. The closer my work gets to a folk tale, the happier I am. And this John Chenneville, waking up in a hospital and not knowing where he is, it goes back to the very ancient theme of the seven sleepers, who were the people, and this is a worldwide folktale, where some people are magically put to sleep in a cave, and they wake up, they think it's only been a month, but it's been 25 or 50 years, and so they're walking out into a completely changed world. And so this is what's happening to John. He's waking up to a completely changed world, including the problems with his brain injury. So it goes back to the seven sleepers. Anyway, it's a long, the folktale, the ancient folktales are fascinating. I mean, how did they get spread throughout the entire earth, from Asia to South America to North America, Native American tribes to Western Europe, and into the Norwegians and the Finns, and they're all alike. I mean, they have the same basis. This just never ceases to amaze me.
And do you read them for pleasure or for
Yeah,
research?
I do. Catherine Briggs, the British folktale, she's a wonderful anthropologist, or a literary anthropologist. But I wanted to say that also I grew up around horses and around farmers and people who farmed, and my grandfather, James Marion Racy, when he was about 18, he had just met my grandmother, and they were sort of courting. And she was very close to her first cousins because she was a half orphan. And so the Speece family, Stanley and Denver Speece and a whole bunch of boys, all became her very close family. They became family to her. And that's how my grandpa met the Speaces. So Stanley Speece, this is when Oklahoma was still a territory, said to my grandfather that they should go out to Oklahoma and look for work on a ranch. And they're farm boys, they more or less know what they're doing. And it would be the great adventure, and this is what happens. Young men go out on adventures, and they go out, and young women often too. So they did. They went out to Oklahoma, and they did get work on a ranch, and they did have lots of adventures. And the funny part is that I have a family photograph of Stanley Speece in the most rigorous 1919 or 1950 cowboy outfit you've ever seen. It's a beautiful brand new Stetson. He's got chaps. He's carrying a rope. And I think he's carrying a pistol, and it's a studio portrait. And this is before they went. It was just in case they didn't get hired, he'd still have a picture of himself as a cowboy. So I've got that one framed. This is called High Hopes. So I heard stories like this from all over the place, from both sides of the family when I grew up.
Elizabeth, do you have cowboys in your family?
No. I mean, we had, my grandparents had a ranch, so I was around animals, but they were not always on the ranch. It was a place they had, and there was the foreman out there, and the people who worked there, whom I knew very well and loved.
Wranglers and foremen.
Exactly, yeah. So, and you just hear so many great stories from these people. I mean, once you can get them to talk, usually they're not so much talkers. Ranchers and foremen are not, but once they start and know you're really interested, they have the best stories.
Both of you are very big to the writers who, the voice of the characters and their narration is very finely tuned. And in your case, Elizabeth, what you all heard was the character she mentioned, Benjamin Shreve, who narrates the book. And the narration, you can't really tell when you read it out loud, but if you read the book, you'll notice that every time Benjamin, and he's writing to a child with the tale he's going to give him when he's 19, but every time he uses have as a verb, it's spelled O-F. And it's actually, if you think about it, how we speak. I would have gone if I could have. I mean, is that, and I'm not saying have. And was this something that you thought about a lot, or?
It's funny, that voice just came to me. I think I have read so many firsthand accounts to do the research, from people writing from in that period. And it just starts to, get into your head how they spoke. And it was often, they often had very large vocabulary, but not the grammatical.
Right.
Yeah, so I really wanted it to be sort of a narrated tale, where Benjamin is speaking. And I just, by doing that, it was the first time I've written a story in a character's voice, first person. And there's an intimacy in that. I just loved this character so much. The thing about it is when you're writing a book, you live with these people all day long. I mean, they're the people you have your coffee with in the morning. They are the people you have your drink with at night if you're having a drink. So you really become so familiar with them. And of all the characters I have developed, maybe because of doing it in Benjamin's voice and seeing everything through his eyes, I just loved him. So he narrates my previous book, The Which Way Tree, as well as this one. I mean, they're standalone novels, but they are both told by Benjamin. And so I mean, I think that whole idea of it being in the voice, really does build a connection to that, to that person.
They are standalone novels. I, for one, was very happy to have read the previous novel, The Which-Way Tree, before, and when I saw that Benjamin was back, when I first read the first page, I thought, oh, good, he's here, he's still here.
Thanks, Beverly.
Both of
Yeah.
you do this. Paulette, you want to talk a little bit about having the same characters in succeeding books?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to say the voice that you developed for Benjamin Street was impeccable.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Incredible and impeccable. I don't think you slipped up one time. It's absolutely, yeah, I can see you completely immersed in that character. It's admirable. It really is. It's quite a feat.
I appreciate that.
So anyway, what was your question?
I don't know. No.
I don't remember.
No.
Bringing character back again after you've already.
Oh, yes, but I only bring them back very briefly. They do
Yeah.
reappear, but they're they're sort of silhouette figures that move in the background, but they show up. It's kind of telling people this all took place at the same area and in the same time period. I haven't left it. I'm still here. So Captain Kidd shows up repeatedly, and Simon the Fiddler shows up in another book. Well, he doesn't quite, but his behavior shows up in Chenneville. And he shows up with Simon. Captain Kidd shows up in Simon the Fiddler's book and gives him some advice. He and some other old codgers, white-haired codgers, sit around and chuckle. And yeah, it's fun to do. I mean, they don't show up as much as they do, like Benjamin is in 2 books. He has 2 books now in his voice. But these only show up briefly.
But it's fun for the reader as well. To say,
It is.
Yeah,
I
you
know,
know.
yeah.
Oh, I remember Simon the Fiddler.
Yeah,
and here
people
he
often
is.
mention it.
And I particularly, I was particularly fond of the red-headed Simon, and was sorry not to have more of him. So if you decide to do that, I'm in.
All right.
Okay.
Well, another thing about it is that, you know, when you're writing a book, you know, the character that you've been with, the people you have spent your time with this whole time, you know, it's over for them. They don't go off and do other things. You don't run into them like, you know, friends later on in life. And so there is a kind of a sadness to that, you know. You miss some of them. And that was, you know, I never intended to write another story with Benjamin Street, but I just missed him after finishing The Which-Way Tree. And that's why, you know, I did this other book. Is that, and the other thing about it is that, you know, you're pulling the strings for everything these characters say and do, and there's nobody else in your life where you get to do that. I mean, if you have children, they go off and, you know, do things on their own volition, and you know, would advise against, and nobody else do you have absolute control over. And so there's this lovely thing about these people that you know who aren't going to say anything you don't want them to say, you know. And even the bad guys, they're not going to do what you don't allow them to do. So it's really nice to revisit a character and, you know, have them come back.
Yes, that happened with Captain Kidd. You know, he showed up first in a book I wrote called Color of Lightning. The main character was Britt Johnson, who was a black frontiersman and a really remarkable, absolutely remarkable man. I think he spoke probably 3 languages, Kiowa and Spanish as well as English. He was a remarkable guy. And I did a lot of research on his life, which is very, very difficult. He did not leave much of a paper trail. He was black, and this is northern Texas, immediately after the Civil War, right in the middle of enormous amounts of tax from Kiowa and Comanche. So paper records were not common. At any rate, I was having dinner with friends of mine, June Chisholm and her husband, Wayne Chisholm, and Wayne is from an old North Texas ranching family. And he mentioned that he had an ancestor whose name was Bigelow Cornelius Kidd, K-I-D-D, who rode around the country reading from newspapers from place to place.
We need to move this a
Oh,
little
okay.
closer. I think they're not hearing you all the way back.
Can you hear me on the back? Okay, I'll try not to be too loud. So anyway, these 2 friends of mine, Wayne Chisholm and his wife June Chisholm, June and I ride horses together a lot. And Wayne is from an old North Texas ranching family, the Chisholms, and he mentioned that he had an ancestor whose name is Captain Kidd. They called him Captain Kidd. Cornelius Bigelow, or Bigelow or Cornelius Kidd, went around reading from newspapers. So when I went up to North Texas, and June went with me because they had lots of relatives up there, and we got to stay, and I wanted to see the place exactly where I think that Britt Johnson would have ridden across the Red River, and he would have had a pack horse with him, and the pack horse would have been, oops, is that better? Am I popping it?
Still popping.
Am I still popping it?
Just a little bit, but keep
All right.
it right in front of you.
All right.
How's
Okay,
that?
there's got to be a secret to this. Can you hear me in the back? Are you good? Okay.
No,
So I wanted
no.
to see where Britt might have ridden across the Red River. It's a very, very difficult river to cross. It's very tricky. There's a lot of quicksand, and there's quick gravel, believe it or not. It's loose gravel that has water running through it, and you can sink just as badly. And he had a pack horse with him, and he had to get the pack horse across. It's loaded with probably around 250, 300 pounds. And these, all the Chisholm relatives were so sweet and so nice, and they took us down to the Red River on, four-wheelers and all that sort of thing, and I could really research it. And then at a certain point in that book, after the Civil War, the 14th and 15th Amendments were passed. Britt, by this time, had become a freighter. A lot of black people in the north part of Texas became freighters, like truck drivers today. And it was doubtful whether he even knew he could go and vote because the news traveled so slowly. So I thought, here is it. I said, Wayne, can I borrow your ancestor? He said, sure, he's dead, go ahead. He's not going to object. So I put him in one of his readings, and this is how I told the audience that the 14th and 15th Amendments had been passed, was through Captain Kidd, this fortuitous character that I ran into, who happened to be real, reading it aloud. And then after that book was finished and after it was published, I thought, he's too good a character to let go,
Right.
He's really funny, and he's smart, and he's assertive, and he's this sharp-tongued old guy, the kind you really like. And so I gave him his own book. And by that time, I had researched captives coming back, the return of captives from Kiowa or Comanche people where they had lived for many years. They'd probably been captured at the age of 5 or something, and they had become completely Kiowa or completely Comanche. They probably did not speak English anymore, and they really fought coming back home. What was home? They didn't know these people. They were Kiowa or Comanche as far as they were concerned, or Apache. This happened a lot in New Mexico. And so I thought, and I read a story about a grandfather who went and who was sent up north to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to retrieve a child that had been brought in by, I believe, the Comanche. And it took him 2 weeks to convince that child to come with him. And finally, the child's adopted mother gave her up. He said, yes, she should go back to her own mother. But she was completely changed, and she never really became part of the dominant white culture. She couldn't comprehend it. She didn't understand it. It took her a long time to relearn English. So this happened to captive after captive after captive, many, many times. So that whole story was interesting because Britt himself, one of the things Britt Johnson was famous for was retrieving captives because he spoke Kiowa or Comanche, one or the other, I'm not sure which. And he searched out children. People would go to him and say, Britt, can you get my child back? His own 2 children had been captive for about a year and a half, but he got them back before they were completely acculturated, so he could fold them back into his family. So Britt was famous for retrieving captives, and so that the two, Britt and Captain Kidd, are meeting in the first of New
Elizabeth, did you borrow any of your characters from real life?
Oh, well, with my first book, way back in 1991, It was, it was the story of Sam Houston's very disastrous first marriage, which ended up, he was governor at the time, and because the marriage split up and his wife left him after 11 weeks, he ended up in Texas. So I wrote a novel about that marriage, and I was so uncomfortable by the end of it to be using real people because, you just feel they're ghosts looking over your shoulder, thinking, saying, I didn't say that, or that isn't why I did that. I mean, you're attributing motive to these people, and motive defines a character, and so you start feeling very responsible. So I thought, I am not going to do this again. So what I did in my second book, which was a big fat book about that takes place during the Texas Revolution, I had real characters appear, but I never saw them through their own eyes. I mean, I wasn't dealing with them as the main characters. I was dealing with them as people that that my fictional people came across, and that was much more comfortable to me. From that time forward, I have made all my people simply mine so that I feel I can orchestrate. I have liberties that I don't have when I am dealing with a real, historical person.
Yeah. Plus, it's fun to make up people.
Yeah, it's fun. That's right. That's right.
Are we till 1?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just want to be sure because I want to leave time for you all to ask questions. These books all of your books, I guess, could also be called historical novels. And I think of historical novels as great stories with a lot of information in them. And the trick is to get the information in without doing what somebody called an information dump, that just says, by the way, this was the time when this happened and that happened, the other. Your books, while they have a great sense of voice and that this is an individual person writing this and she has made up this person and created the book and the story, but there's all this information in both the books that I kept saying. I kept thinking, I don't know what a cara eagle is in Paulette's Fall, or what a Madstone is in Elizabeth's book. Do you feel like you had to do research before you could write the book, or did you wait? I don't know. What did you do?
Yeah, no, I do years of research before, and I say years because I'm a slow reader. So I have all this, pile of books that I get that I need to read and get through, and then it's a matter of, underlining as I read, making notes in the back about important passages, that I might be able to use something from, and so it's really it's a matter of culling the information into these notebooks and then crossing out what I'm using and highlighting what I may use, and it goes into other notebooks and other notebooks, and then as I start writing, I find out the new things I need to learn about. And so I go off on these other tangents of researching while I'm writing. So it never stops, and it's really one of the most exciting things about writing for me, because it's like a treasure hunt. If you're reading, fiction that has already been filtered through somebody else's imagination, you can't, that's off limits to use any of that. But with with nonfiction research, all of that is there for the taking. If you come across, of just a great detail or a great character or something, you can use that. And so it's really exciting to read the history, the research that you have to do before and during writing.
Yeah, you can end up in some weird places.
Can you move up a little bit?
Yeah, move up a little bit, yeah.
You can end up in some weird places. And so when Captain
Say
Kidd...
that again, Paulette.
Yes, you could end up in some very strange places when you're
doing research,
when you're
yeah.
doing research, but with money, with clothes, with women's underwear, and what were they wearing in 18?
What were they eating?
What were they eating, and with what? And this was true for when Captain Kidd and Johanna were being pursued by the evil bad guys and were trapped on top of that ridge, and he's out of ammunition, and I thought, okay, now what am I going to do? And I thought, well, there's those dimes, I know my brother, I grew up with guns, with my brother and my dad's guns. My brother had a 410, and he used to stuff nails down the shotgun, down in the shell on the cartridge. And so I thought, wait a minute, she's got this dime. So I went on YouTube to see if I could find an antique shotgun, like about a 12 gauge or a 410. And I ran onto this YouTube video of these young guys who took out, and to see how many things they could shoot out of a shotgun barrel, out of a cartridge, and they were shooting pieces of coat hangers, and they were blowing these. It was a dump, electronic stuff, and they were blowing these televisions and tablets and laptops all to pieces, and refrigerators. They were just knocking them to bits with nails and coat hangers. And then this one guy said, a 12-gauge shotgun shell is the only thing that will hold a U.S. coin of any size, and he poured dimes in it, and they just knocked a laptop all to pieces with it.
Right.
And I thought, yeah, they've got dimes, because she goes around and collects dimes for the readings, so it all fit together.
Yeah.
And she would have known that. The Comanche and Kiowa very quickly figured out how gunpowder and how guns work. And they were shooting silver spoons at people, and when they would run out of, material to stuff their muzzle loaders with, they'd shoot anything, pieces of bridles, anything that you could explode and go. And so you can pretty well blow anything out of a barrel. It's big enough as long as it fits, like a king bolt on a guy fired a king bolt. He tore the king bolt out of his wagon and stuffed it down a tiny cannon and in an Indian fight. So.
Yeah, I was fascinated with those dimes.
You could end up with
I was too. Yeah.
I never.
So that was
Yeah.
fun.
And one of the things also that you have both kind of talked about on this is that, one of the really important things about writing historical fiction is that you have to know what to leave out. It's not so much what to put in, it's what to leave out. And the minute you start, giving a history lesson, because, you had to spend all the time learning this, and you want to share this and make, your reader, read all this, then you're going down the wrong road. You have to peel it down and just keep the story moving. And my rule of thumb is, if it doesn't advance the story, or it happened like in the next county over, even though it was really interesting, or some extraneous thing, or it doesn't inform the reader about the character, it has to go. So it's like, I think of it like you have this boat, and you have all these things you can put in it, but it's going to start to be really low in the water, and then you're going to have to start tossing things out.
What if it's the best sentence you feel like you ever wrote? Do you still kick it out?
If it's one sentence, maybe you can keep it, but if it's a paragraph, it's got to go. Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's yeah.
Okay. Paulette, you talked about folk tales. You've talked about all the books you had to read. What about the internet? Do you use the internet? Is it somewhat useful, not useful, or?
For research, yes.
Mhm.
I use Wikipedia a lot, and they're very good on historical stuff. And I use YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
mainly those two.
Okay. No, I used, my last several books have been nonfiction. I used newspapers.com. Of course, I was writing in a more modern time,
Yeah.
which is fabulous to use.
Is it?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, you can look up a name, a subject, or anything, and you get the newspaper articles.
Do they have the old newspapers? I mean,
They do.
like things that have been on microfilm and microfiche. And, yeah.
In some newspapers in some towns, I was shocked that the Memphis Commercial Appeal, which was the newspaper that we read, the big news, the city newspaper, I grew up in the Mississippi Delta, was not on newspapers.com a couple of years
But
ago.
it's on microfiche.
I know, but this was during COVID, so I needed
Yeah,
to
be
be
home.
at home, looking up stuff. Okay, I would like to sort of talk about your titles. Paulette, in your case, there is a subtitle to Chenneville. Now, Chenneville is the leading character's last name, and so that makes sense because John Chenneville is basically carries the story. But there is an actual subtitle, which you don't usually get with a novel, and it's called, it's a novel of murder, loss, and vengeance, which it certainly is. But did you think about doing that? Did your editor, or how did that happen?
The editor came up with a novel of murder, loss, and vengeance.
And were you happy with it?
Yes,
Yeah,
I've got a great editor.
yeah, because I was thinking about what you said about the quest book. John Chenneville is on a quest to heal himself, in addition to, if I can spill these beans, find the murderer of his sister and her husband and a baby. Somebody killed them all, and he finds this out. So while he is trying to find this murderer, who turns out to be what we would call a serial killer, he's also dealing with this grievous brain injury that has robbed him of memory, language, a lot of what we consider real life. And so there is a place in the book that, what I did with my glasses, there they are. When he is talking to a doctor, John, about, he says, he went to talk to the doctor. They had a long talk then about men who murder, those strange people who kill over and over again. And when John Chenneville leaves, he carries within himself those eternal questions, the great mysteries of homicide and memory, of radical evil. It's really fascinated with that phrase, radical evil. Can you talk about how you define that, or where it came from? Anything you have to say.
Well, I sort of, that's not particularly a Western theme, but when you're dealing with serial killers, it is a mystery. You're obviously dealing with a human being. This person looks human, speaks humanly, and can often act quite rationally. But the things that they do, I mean, like Ted Bundy, are unbelievable. And what drives them to do this?
Mm-hmm.
So this is radical evil. And they're really not human, but they are human. So that's the mystery. That's a terrible mystery.
Mm-hmm. I've just never heard anybody define it quite that way.
Yeah, it's a great definition.
And it made me think a lot. And in the Madstone, two things. One, now that we're talking about evil, in the Which Way Tree, I would say, would you think there's a really bad panther in that book? And the panther's on the cover, and the panther, they do everything they can to kill it, but evil is hard to get rid of, right? Mm-hmm. Did you think of that panther as evil in the book?
You know, I just never think metaphorically. Mm-hmm. It's just always about reality, you mm-hmm. know. I think, you know, even with the books I choose to read, I mean, I want everything to act as it would act in real life. I want people to behave as they would. I want them to speak as they would. I want it, because once I stop believing that it's real, I stop being invested in the story. So the panther in my book, even though people in the book begin to think of it as this, you know, this evil predator, just acts like a mountain lion. I mean, it is a mountain lion. They were called panthers back in the day, mm-hmm. And the way he behaves is like a mountain lion behaves. So I don't think of it as representative of evil. in that sense.
And the panther comes back in the Madstone, not in the flesh, but
Right.
in the fear of
Right.
and the concern.
Yes.
And is
Yeah, these kids were traumatized. Yeah. by
yeah.
it.
And do you have the panther with you yet?
There was a mountain lion that tracked my son once in the hill country, which is what inspired me to write, The Which
my
Way Tree.
God.
Yeah, because, that sense of us as prey, as meat, is something we don't like to think about. But there was just, my son got lost in the canyons in the hill country. He basically took a walkabout. I say he was lost. He and a friend decided to detour off of the route they were on, and ended up being brought back by helicopter at 3 a.m. But in the course of that, the deputy sheriff of Bandera County had seen the panther that was headed down the canyon where the boys had been, and it was weirdly tracking the search party. I mean, we were all out there screaming, for my son, and hollering into these canyons and just getting this echo back, and it was the most terrifying event of my life. And so when they brought the kids back, the deputy sheriff said to me, at the time, because it was kind of, at that point, we knew that was the canyon that my son had gone down, because we found that they had taken this little canoe. He was 14. He was an idiot. I mean, he was not yet, he's a very smart young man now, but at the time he had not reached the peak of his maturity. And the deputy sheriff, they saw the panther. He said, "I smell a cat." They shone the light up. He was with a Texas Ranger, had come out to help us. I mean, several people had come out to help us to the ranch, and there was the cat, weirdly going along beside them, probably just interested, probably would not have hurt my son, because there's lots of game where he was, but it was creepy, and so we knew at that point, having seen the canoe, the wet paddles of the canoe, this was the canyon my son was in. And then the helicopter had spotted, a little campfire going. I had checked my son's pockets to make sure he had no matches and would not start a fire, but thank goodness he'd hidden them well, and he did start a fire way deep. And of course, when he saw the helicopter, he immediately assumed it was drug runners, so he doused the fire, which made it much harder to find him again. But we knew he was in that canyon, and we knew the mountain lion was headed that direction. And then when they brought my son back from the helicopter, and there was just this moment where all the the blades are whirring and the lights are flashing, and the deputy sheriff says to me over the roar of this noise, "I don't mean to scare you, ma'am, but when we got there, that cat had its eyes on your boys. My son was with a friend." And there was just something about that image, that made me obsessed with mountain lions, so that for a whole year, every night, my little treat was to Google what mountain lion attack, Chihuahua in Montana had gone down, or whatever it was. And then I decided to do something more constructive with the obsession. But that whole thing about, being prey became really important to me. Yeah.
Well, and the cat is very important to a particular character in Which Way Tree.
Right.
But in the Madstone, there's a snake who actually appears, unlike the panther. And as you heard, this story is told to a child to give to him. So the child is who attracts the snake. The mother is there. And so this is what Benjamin said. The wound did not bleed a great deal, but the puncture marks was plain and appeared sufficiently deep for poison to have sank in. Your mother got to her feet with trouble. She's pregnant. Your cries went down to a whimper. She stood with her back to us for a long minute. When she turned back around to us, a stillness was come over her. She said in a calm and steadfast manner, "Where can we find a Madstone?" Okay, how did you know about a Madstone? Does anybody in here Has anybody heard of a Madstone? Okay, I hadn't either.
So they are basically like kidney stones, or, they grow in the belly of mostly like deer or other ruminant animals. And for centuries, they were believed to cure rabies or draw poisons, out, toxins out. And you would apply them to the bite, and then you would put them in boiling milk, and if they turned kind of a light shade of green, if they seemed to kind of stick to the bite, whatever, it was believed it was pulling out the poisons. Well, a death from rabies or from any kind of toxin bite is horrible. I mean, because particularly with rabies, which is what Madstones were mostly used for, there was no cure. I mean, children were strapped to their beds and, smothered between mattresses. People usually shot themselves or had somebody shoot them. They would be tied to a tree because they would go mad and then they would die. And it's an excruciating death. And there was no hope. There was no cure. There was no treatment. And I mean, when you knew that rabies was in the neighborhood, people had to kill their dogs. I mean, that is the way it happened. And so the Madstones offered this hope, and they were brought over from Europe. They had been in families for centuries, or they were found here. If you killed a deer, you cut it open, and if this object was in its stomach, then you had a very valuable item. They were kept often locked up in churches so that anybody in the town, could have use of them if they needed them. And they would call for them at the next town. Somebody bring the Madstone. And it was the only hope that you had. And so that's what they were. They were oddly shaped little things, usually about this big around. If you look online, you can see pictures of them. And they were different colors. They all looked a little different, but they were basically concretions of minerals and hair and things that had hardened inside the belly and not passed through. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to end there on that, and just remember, if you get bit by a snake, what you need to do. Find a deer and cut him up. We've got a little bit of time for questions from, yes, sir?
Ms. Jiles, in Chenneville, I was struck by, you talked about being a quest, but I was struck by it being a very geographic, place-oriented descriptions of, like I followed it in my mind like a map, quest, journey. And I was wondering if that was intentional, the description of the landscape. It's almost like the character, the landscape is almost like a character itself in the novel. It struck me, but you wrote it, not me.
I do love
Is that
it.
intentional?
I do love it. I've camped out so much in my life. I ride with 4 of the women, and they leave their poor husbands to eat frozen dinners while we go off to North Texas, and we've been to New Mexico, the mountains of New Mexico, Big Bend. We've crossed the Rio Grande in New Mexico, sneaked over and sneaked back. And so camping out and being out under the stars with horses, it's been such a joy in my life and a lot of fun. But also remember that John Chenneville has never been down there to that part, and so it's all new to him. He's like a baby. He's like seeing this world for the first time. And that's kind of a fun thing to do with a character. When the character for the first time sees this brand new world, it's all new to him. It might be new to you, but you kind of take joy in his, perceptions of how things have changed. Like the piney woods of East Texas. He's just amazed by them. They're so mysterious and so beautiful. And this is long before they had ever started logging down there. So some of those trees are 50 feet around. And Benjamin Shreve does the same thing. I mean, he can't wait to see the Gulf, and all that
Right.
water. And of course, it's not pointy.
Yeah.
Those are long waves coming in. But so the landscape in this book in Chenneville was a brand new thing for my main character, and that was fun to do. Also, just to evoke those times in North Texas when I camped
Okay, anybody else? Mm-hmm.
I was a child of a father who, in 40s and 50s, lived each day to get home at night and read the pulp Western magazine.
Yeah.
Great.
Zangray
Yeah.
and Max Brand, and those authors. But unlike him, I'm more attuned now to the modern Western authors, Craig Johnson.
Yeah, he's
and,
great.
Tony Hillerman.
Oh, yeah.
And they have a lot of mysticism, both of them. And being from the West, how do you feel about those kinds of things in Western books?
I mean, I love a Western story anyway, but Craig Johnson is a great guy. He's been really nice to me, giving me some good blurbs and everything for my books. And his books are funny and wonderful and great. And Tony Hillerman, of course, just really fascinating. So those are great writers and good books.
Yeah, I like those writers as well. What I wanted to say is it makes a fertile field out of which much can grow. Like Shakespeare's plays grew out of a whole culture and community of other playwrights and other writers.
And they obviously have to do great deal of research to.
Yeah, and it can really help you.
Yep. Yes.
It's not stealing.
I was just going to ask, Ms. Jiles, you write a book, someone says we'd like to make a movie of this book. What is that experience like? Do you hand over complete control? Have any input? How difficult was that
Yeah,
for you?
yeah. I trusted that director to do, because he directed the Bourne Conspiracy or the Bourne whatever it was. It was an action film. So I didn't insist on having some input into the script. I could have put my foot down and fought for it, but I thought, it's going to be okay. And so my agreement with them did not include me having any input whatsoever on the script, not one thing. And it was done entirely without my knowledge. There was an enormous amount of changes that went on. They totally changed the character of Captain Kidd. He was completely changed, which made it a different film. But there was nothing I could do about it. So.
I have a friend who read News of the World. This is Paulette's book, previous book to this one, that starred Tom Hanks. And I visited her and left her my copy of The Which Way Tree and News of the World. And she said, wrote me and said, we watched it last night on wherever it is. And she said, all the way through, I kept saying, that didn't happen in the book. That didn't happen in the book. And I said, Jeannie, I would have killed you for doing that. I mean, a book and a movie are not the same thing. Would you like to say anything about your experience with the movies?
Yeah, so with The Which Way Tree, Robert Duvall bought the option to do the movie and asked me who should write it. So I suggested a friend of ours, Stephen Harrigan, who's a terrific writer and who's my best friend, and because he knows how to do scripts. And he was busy, and he said, I'll write it if you'll write it with me. So he showed me how to write it because I really wanted complete control. I really did. And Robert Duvall was great to work with because we would send him the script, and within 42 hours every time, he had his notes, he had his suggestions, we were on the phone. I mean, he was really on it. Now, we have not been able to get the funding. He's still our executive producer now. But when that happened, Steve and I and Bob Burney from Picture House, who owns Picture House, and the casting director that Duvall had said, we will make it. So we formed a production company. We still don't have the money. We do have T-shirts that say Panther Dog. That's the name of our. We have not yet been able to afford the ball caps, but we will. But the problem is, it is an expensive movie because the kids are in every scene, and because there's a lot of computer graphics to generate the panther, and there's a big flood scene that would be expensive. So for an indie movie, I never had the nerve to do what you did, which was turn it over to somebody else, which probably means it will never happen. I mean, that's the thing. If you want to keep control, but I would rather it not happen than have it misrepresented, or in the hands of other people. So I have learned a lot about the movie business. I think it's so fun because it's collaborative, and whether or not we ever have a movie, remains a question. I think we will, but it may be 10 years down the road. Who knows? Yeah.
My only experience with the movies is I had my book Crossover, which was published in '92, and I'm part of it. And it was a movie, CBS Movie of the Week. Diane Keaton played me. And my friend in Houston said, I don't know why when you meet people you don't say, hi, I'm Beverly Lowry. Diane Keaton played me in the movie.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe I will. Thank you all for coming. I urge you to buy these books.